Welcome back to another episode of the Fantasy Guru Show on the Elite Football Show. Again, I am your host, Ciaran, and I am joined by my good friend, Haider. How are you doing today, Haider?
Good, mate. Just having to change my team every, 2 days? So just remembering to stay on top of that. I stupidly told my brother that the deadline was, a couple of days ago, and he didn't know about it, and then he did pretty well, so now he went above me in the tables. So, yeah, all good. Hope everyone's having a nice lead up to Christmas, and hopefully we're going to be providing you with some really great tips.
Yeah, it was an interesting one this week because having 2 game weeks in really a couple of days was kind of crazy. Like, I looked at my team on, I think it was Monday, and I had no idea what I was going to change, so I actually just left it the same because I was like, the matchups are pretty decent. The players that I have, they should do quite well. And then some of the big names just really didn't do much for us. And that's why you saw, I think, the averages in the midweek one were within the 40s again. So that's, I think, the third or fourth time now where you're seeing it in mid-40s game week, which it's not that normal. Normally you see a little bit more consistency. So it's a bit unfortunate, but again, it's going to be crazy as well coming up to the Christmas break and everything. So you look at the Christmas break and there's probably a game every 2 or 3 days, kind of like we've been seeing this last week. What's your strategy normally when you come to the Christmas break? Because it can be crazy with fantasy because sometimes you're having teams play 2 games in the space of 3 days, and when they're not all on the same day, it can get really hectic. And especially now with COVID, that could even get worse.
It's really, really tough. I mean, for me, it's about making as less, sort of transfers as possible. That's the key, because you don't want to be hemorrhaging points. You got Christmas period. Is it 6 games in 16 days? Something ridiculous like that. So think about it. If you're going to do 2 transfers every single time, you can hemorrhage 24 points. That's a lot. So that's always been my strategy. And usually I leave my wild card to the Christmas period, but I use mine very, very early. So that's what I'll be doing. I've got an idea of what I want to do this week. It's difficult because I've got a lot of money packed in. I've got very expensive defenders. The Chelsea boys, Reece James and Ben Chilwell. And it's really, really tough because that's stopping me from making a couple of transfers I need to. So it's very key. Just make as minimal transfers as possible, maybe one at every single game, and really get your captain spot on, because that's when you're going to get a lot of points.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. Like, I know this week, because I wasn't sure on changing any, I think I'm a little bit lucky for this weekend because I have the 2 free transfers now, because not making one particular game week. So often you could always look at that way of doing things. So in one of the weeks where you're not sure of changing it, or one of the games, just don't do it. So maybe you get that extra transfer in, but it's going to be one of those where, and I think this is where you see a lot of people drop off from fantasy as well, because over the Christmas period, they forget to set a lot of their lineups, and they realize that maybe one of their big players wasn't playing. And that's where those are the 2 basically times where you see most people dropping off, is right after the first few weeks of the season, and then right after Christmas, because they forget that there's so many games in those kind of just a few days and all the different deadlines. And so I think it is one that we have to look out for. There hasn't been too much changes really in the past week in terms of when we were listening to kind of the press conferences earlier. So there's a couple small notes. So from Everton, for example, you've Seamus Coleman, who's back, but then again, there's no Alan or no James Rodriguez. You have Thiago returning to training for Liverpool. Now, he's not going to be ready for this game week, but over the Christmas period, you probably see him come in for 1 or 2 games, maybe when it gets to kind of the start of January. You have, again, Barkley still out for Aston Villa. Ziyech, I know he's slowly coming back, but I doubt he'll be playing this weekend either. You've Koch out for Liverpool. I think the big one that kind of happened right before the game last week, I think it was the one at the weekend for Liverpool, was that Diogo Jota is out for a couple of weeks now because of them playing him in the Champions League, and really they didn't need to. You have Cavani could be out for United. I know there's mixed reports there There's reports saying that he'd be missing, but then Solskjaer in the press conference said that he'd be available.
I think
it's a tricky one.
I think he'd be on the bench.
Yeah, I think he'd be on the bench. It's a weird one because the reports that came out are usually fairly reliable in terms of the injury stuff. And then with the manager saying that he is available, I wonder if that's a bit of trying to push back at the media a little bit for trying to get in before a press conference. You've Bale that's out. But one of the interesting ones for this week anyway is West Ham. They have a couple players missing. So you've Jared Bowen, Cresswell, Antonio, and Masuaku all doubtful for that game against Chelsea. And then obviously with Wolves, Dendoncker and Bolly pulled out of the last game. So there's a couple of small ones there. Nothing too big in terms of the big players in fantasy like we've seen previously because of things like COVID. But again, those are kind of the main updates so far anyway. Look, things can change, and that's the one thing that I would say for the Christmas period is that people need to make sure that they are paying attention to some of the injuries because there's going to be a lot of games and it's going to be hard to follow it all. But just make sure you're going onto your app, make sure you're checking, because one game where, let's say, De Bruyne or Salah picks up a minor injury and they don't play for the next week, and that's your week basically done. So it's one of those that you have to kind of watch out for. Looking back at the game week for 12 and 13, is there anything in particular that stood out to you when kind of reviewing what happened in the past 7 days?
I think just looking at the team of the week, just add though to the two players that you might have missed out, Ciaran. Benteke being banned is pretty big because he looks like he's in good form, although they have got Liverpool, but then Liverpool haven't got a first choice defender really. It's Fabinho, so that's one to look out for, and he looks like he's been quite effective. And then Aguero, Pep was saying today, looks like he could get some minutes. I think that's going to be huge for them if they can keep him fit. Problem is, I don't think we'll ever see a fit Aguero ever again. In the Premier League, at least. I just think he's too many injuries and he's getting on a bit. But just looking at the team of the week, I mean, you're just looking at some of the players that featured. I mean, I've got Nick Pope. He's been fantastic. You've got Holgate. You've got El Mohammadi as well. I mean, not many players really got clean sheets. That was a key. Rashford getting a brace. You had Gundogan in there from City. So I brought in De Bruyne. He got a couple of bonus points, even though he didn't really contribute, which was odd. It's not like he got an assist. We saw Aubameyang feature for the first time in a long time. McGoldrick scoring a brace as well. Rodrigo featuring, and then Martial, who hasn't as well. So looking at that, there's a lot of players there you wouldn't have expected to get high scoring points. United scoring 3 goals without Bruno Fernandez even getting a return in any shape or form. I believe that's the first time he hasn't gotten a return in an away game since he's joined United, which is just mind blowing.
Yeah, that's shocking compared to, like, you look at how productive he's been, and then you see United score 3 goals, win 3-2, and you would just expect, seeing that, if you didn't see the goal scores, that you'd expect in some shape or form that Bruno Fernandez would have been involved in one of them. But again, just the way the game went, he again, it's kind of like we said with James Rodriguez, is maybe he was within the link-up play, but didn't get that kind of killer pass for the assist, or wasn't on the end of any of the chances to score. The interesting one there, I think, was Rashford, because I think he topped the score in there with 14 points. Is he starting to become a bit of an actual option for people that want to bring in a United player? Because look, we know there's a lot of fans out there for fantasy that they do like to have their own players in because they don't like supporting or cheering on players and other teams. Is this the chance for people to actually look at Rashford? And you look at his goal contributions, and while it's not been consistent, he's still getting a pretty decent amount of goal scoring chances.
He's a really interesting one. I mean, you're looking at that United midfield. One that's a real shame is Mason Greenwood, because he just hasn't really fired yet. He will, and he'll be a great option. Last season, he was the pick of the cheap options. I mean, he really saved me at the end when he scored a hatful of goals, and he was only about 4.5 million, so he's gone up to about 7.5. Marcus Rashford, 5 goals and 4 assists. It's actually a pretty good return. It's a really good return, isn't it? Considering it's showing that he's both creative and he's able to put the ball in the back of the net. But you're right, he's not consistent. Looking at he scores in spells. We know that as a United fan, he's streaky. He's got 3 in his last 3 games, so that's 2 against Sheffield United and one against West Ham. So he's an interesting one. He's quite highly valued in terms of his price. He's 9.4 million, but he's also a differential. Only 8% have him in the side. So I think he's definitely an option. You're looking at Leeds. Rashford loves to run in behind. Leeds will play a high line. So I think he's definitely an option. But I think what's positive for people that do have Rashford is that Ollie doesn't like to rotate him. And that's a problem. I mean, we've complained, haven't we, a lot of times about his lack of rotation for him, and he plays him while he's injured. So I do expect if you're going to pick a United player who's not Bruno Fernandez, he'd be one. But actually, this is going to sound a bit crazy, but I actually think Pogba might be a really interesting differential option as well, because at 7.7 million, he's actually very reasonable, and he's looking creative. So if you are looking for an alternative to Bruno, Pogba is possibly one. I personally wouldn't be bringing him in, but you're looking at United's midfield options. There's not enough there in terms of creativity or points when it comes to fantasy. So I think if you're looking at midfielder, Bruno's the obvious one. But if you want to save an extra 1 million, then I think Rashford's definitely a good option.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because while we look at Pogba and we say that he played pretty well against Sheffield United, you look at the fantasy stats and it doesn't actually reflect it too much there. And that's the biggest issue, I think, with Pogba, is that he might be able to get the assist here or there, but unless he's constantly contributing, he's not going to get the fantasy points you want for someone that you're actually spending a little bit of points on. So again, I'd probably stay away there. I think the other big thing is just some of the big players that kind of blanked again. This has been kind of a theme lately where there has been a lot of big players that they're getting in they're still in those single digits pretty much every single week. Look, this is the first time I think Bruno's been low in a while. So I think you can kind of forget about him for a minute. But you look at some of the others. You look at even Mane. He's been constantly hitting 3 or 4 points. You have yourself who brought in De Bruyne. I think he got 4 or 5. You have Sterling and Salah, who Salah played well, but still ends up with 7 points. And it's just one of those that you really have to be careful on the top players you bring in, because you're spending a lot of fantasy points on. And it's the reason why we're seeing the averages so low, because really everybody has those same high profile players and they're just not performing at a consistent level. I don't think there's anyone really you could, and it's strange to think of it, but you think Kane, Son, and maybe Bruno are the only ones this year that you can look at and have pretty consistent fantasy points throughout as they're kind of top of the range. You could probably put in Salah as well. But other than that, there's not too many. And that's why I think we're seeing, when you go through the game weeks, that a lot of the averages are staying in the 40s and 50s. And there's not been too many weeks where you're having those crazy high numbers. I think there was one week where the average was closing in on the 70 points. But I think that's because it was one of those weeks when Salah was hit a lot of points. You had Kane, Son, and everybody had kind of the same sort of team. But it is an interesting one, because going into this Christmas period is, like we said, there's not going to be as many points to be had, or there's not going to be many changes that you're going to have to make. So you're going to be pretty much with the same team. So I think now is really the time that you need to make sure that you've locked in those kind of key players going forward. You look at the kind of the names we mentioned. I think going into this week, this is the week you want to change. If you don't have that superstar that you want in your team, I think this is the week you need to do it. Because really, when it comes over the Christmas break, that, like you said earlier, you don't want to constantly tinker with your team. So what I would say is, going into this week, get the player that you really want in your team and keep them there, and keep them there over that Christmas period, because it's one of those that you see it every single year. The people that do tinker with their team a lot over the Christmas period actually end up costing themselves more points. Because remember, with even these big players, we've just mentioned that a lot of them aren't getting big points. If you're losing points to bring them in, you have to look at how much is it worth it. You look at De Bruyne, let's say the people that brought him in and had to spend 4 points to do it. If you only got 4 points, it means you're getting 0. So you're really getting nothing from it. So I think that's why I would say is, if you did the same as me and you didn't transfer anyone in for the midweek game, you're lucky and you have 2 free transfers. Use them wisely now, because really once it gets to the Christmas period, it's going to be so difficult to tell because nobody's going to know who's fit, who's not, because they're all going to be playing so many games. You won't see many players of that kind of high echelon teams probably play 90 minutes in every single game. So you will lose some points here and there. So I think it is one to kind of look out for. With thinking of that, what players would you be looking out for that Christmas period that you would be aiming for maybe to bring in a little bit earlier this week in preparation for that Christmas period?
You got to bring in the Spurs boys. I've kept the Spurs boys through the whole thing, but I think looking at fixtures now, they've got Leicester again. Not again, sorry. They've got Leicester at home, and that's a difficult game. It'd be interesting to see. But after that, you've got Wolves, Fulham, Leeds, and then that's the end of the Christmas period. Then you've got a gap till Villa. So looking at that now, you've got Wolves, Fulham, Leeds, which are going to be games which you expect Tottenham to win. I think even the Leicester game, you expect Tottenham to win. So with Spurs, there's only going to be two players that are going to score any of the points. Yeah. And that's generally how it is. We saw that the other day. The Lo Celso got the assist, but you just know you got to have Son. You have to have Son. There's no way you don't. And then Kane's on penalties. So for me, I haven't changed that. I mean, I've brought them in and they've stayed. I haven't captained them, but they've stayed and they've given solid returns. Bruno Fernandez is another player who I brought in. I didn't have him, but I brought him in. He's been in for a while now, and he's just always going to affect the game. The only issue is now, how's Ollie going to rotate? So that's the problem. And that's why I'd be staying away from City players, because De Bruyne will get rested. That's just what Pep does.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, that's the thing with those big squads. And while it's good to have a big squad for this kind of portion of the season, sometimes it's nice when your kind of main player is actually on a squad. There's not that much rotation. You look at, for example, Spurs, they can't really afford, especially where they are in the table, to be letting Kane or Son rest, because they need them playing, because they need to be able to pick up the points over the Christmas period. I know Pep came out today and said he doesn't want to rest De Bruyne, but that's typical Pep fashion that he does that, and then suddenly De Bruyne is not starting. So it's one of those. It's the reason why you're seeing some weeks Bernardo Silva's in, some weeks Ferran Torres is in, some weeks Phil Foden's in. It's one of those that, like you said, I think you stay away from some of the City players. The other one that I would kind of be drawn to is some of the Chelsea fixtures over the next couple of weeks. So look, this weekend they have West Ham, and I've already mentioned a couple of those players that are out, but Chelsea do normally have a pretty hard time against West Ham. West Ham have had their number over the last couple of seasons, and they know how to play against Chelsea. So even though it seems like it should be an easy enough win for Chelsea, I think that's going to be a pretty tough game. And look, Chelsea have been in some shaky form the last couple of weeks. When they play against a team in the top half of the table,
I can definitely see West Ham nicking this like 1-0, 2-1. Souček at a corner, and then they're gonna get. I don't see Chelsea winning this game. I really don't. Even though I've got two Chelsea defenders.
Yeah, you could just see easily with all the rumors that happened in the summer that Declan Rice comes up with a winner, and all the Chelsea fans go crazy saying, "Why didn't we sign him?" It's one of those. Then you look at it, and on Boxing Day they have Arsenal against Chelsea. So again, that's a weird one, because Arsenal haven't been doing that great in terms of their defensive form lately. But you see Aubameyang score. Arsenal tend to do quite well when it comes to the kind of North London derby, and it's usually a pretty cagey one. And look, the games on Boxing Day are usually fairly bad. Like the problem is you never really get really exciting games, because all the players, they have the kind of excitement of Christmas, but also they're training on Christmas Day as well. And it kind of, that's why I think that particular one, straight after Christmas, you do see a lot of the big teams, they do struggle. So that one's an interesting one. You have Chelsea against Villa, then 2 days later. And then after that, you have Chelsea against Man City. So it's a pretty tough run of results for a team that has struggled against the teams that have been in the top half. So I guess the only banker there is the game against Arsenal, because, you know, relegation and all that for Arsenal. But sorry, Haas, with that. But yeah, exactly. It's just one of those that I think up to now we've gotten some benefits from the Chelsea players early on, but you're starting to see as the kind of bigger games come, and as I think as the expectation was rising, you're starting to see the Chelsea team kind of dip in form a little bit. And there's only been a couple of players that I think have really played well over the last couple of weeks. I think Olivier Giroud is one. He's been excellent for Chelsea. He's been scoring a lot of goals.
Starting, I think that's where if he plays, you got to be like, right, I've got to bring in either Reece James or Chilwell. I've got both. Yeah. I've had them for a while, and they're both returning because that's their outlet. That's where they're getting most of their crosses. That's why I wouldn't be going towards a Werner, who's playing on the left wing, which is where he doesn't play. I wouldn't touch Havertz. Anyone that's touching Havertz is an idiot, or they're a Chelsea fan. He's been absolutely shocking. He's had COVID as well, but they haven't found. There's two things wrong with Chelsea, and this is why I'd avoid Chelsea's attackers. They haven't found the position for Havertz and Werner. Giroud is still their best option at striker, probably, but they're not going to play him every week in, week out. So it might be Abraham, who's not at the required level. But if he does play, then you look at Chelsea's defenders, especially their fullbacks, who are both very good crossers of the ball, and they're the best attacking outlets. So you got Reece James at 5.2 million, who's actually a steal, in my opinion. And then you got Chilwell, he's been fantastic, 6 million. So that's where you should probably be looking if you're going to bring a Chelsea player in.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and it goes back to, I think, some of the conversation we had in kind of before the season started, that Chelsea bringing in so many players, people are saying, oh, they're definitely title contenders. But you do have to remember that not every player is going to turn out the way you expect them to, or they're not going to transition seamlessly into the Premier League like players like Bruno Fernandez and Kevin De Bruyne did when they came in. I know Kevin De Bruyne was a second stint, but the minute he came in when he was playing for City, he was excellent. It's the same with Bruno. You look at Havertz, you look at Werner, and even when you look at Ziyech, it's just like they have all these names and they're just throwing them in the side and they're not actually putting them in a position to be successful. Like, I'm surprised I haven't seen a Werner up top with Kai Havertz right behind him.
Which is what he did there, because he played either false nine or he played as a second striker. The problem is with Kai Havertz as well is that the expectation is huge, and I could have told you this was going to happen because he wasn't ready for a 70-80 million pound move. He simply wasn't ready. He's a really talented footballer, by the way. I know you agree with that. He will tear it up eventually. Maybe not. We might never see it in the Premier League, but he will. He is a very talented player. Like, I'm supremely talented. But until Chelsea sort that out, I don't see the player you probably want to bring in is Mason Mount.
Yeah,
he's valued pretty well. But apart from that, would you choose any other Chelsea midfielders?
Not really. There's none of them that really stick out to me. Like I said, I think we've said it before. Really, the only players you can feel confident in the Chelsea team are the kind of wing backs because they create so many chances, and it's because Giroud's been playing up top. Like, I know we've said kind of it's not when Werner's up there and it's only Giroud. I wouldn't even be wanting to have them if Tammy Abraham's up front because he's missing a lot of chances as well. Like, it's a really weird one for Chelsea. It was literally like they saw these players that they wanted to bring in, but didn't actually have a system to where they would all work together, because I don't think those attacking players do work together. Because you look at Werner, and it made sense if he was going to Liverpool. It made complete sense because he could basically be him, Salah, and Mane could just be so fluid and they could do whatever they wanted up front. The way Chelsea play is just completely different. And look, it might get better throughout the season, but it's mad to think that your two big signings in Werner and Kai Havertz, and you can probably count in your hand how many good games they've had, and that's a big problem. I haven't seen Werner really play the way he did when he was in Germany at all. And he starts for the national team.
Really good player.
Yeah,
I would. He's a really good player. And the game that he really impressed me was the game against Southampton, where he was absolutely electric. They haven't tried him as a lone striker. I don't think he is a lone striker, but then play him with someone. It's really obvious. You spent 50 million. You spent 120 million on both, so you got to build a team around them. Now, another one is Pulisic. Fantastic last season, and I think Chelsea fans overrate their players.
Yeah.
Not me having a go at Chelsea fans, but I think they get way overexcited. And this is why when you we're looking at from a non-fantasy and a fantasy point of view. That's why when you actually see what Bruno Fernandez has done at Man United, you really think, oh my God, it's absolutely mind-blowing how good he's been, how consistent he's been since the day he walked in. And he came from a perceived weaker league. The Portuguese league is the worst league. And that's why you kind of see with Kai Havertz, you know what it reminds you of? It reminds you when Paul Pogba came. Paul Pogba actually played well when he came. But you're expecting Kai Havertz to be a player that's going to be scoring and assisting, doing everything. But actually, he can't even do the basics right now properly. So that's the thing. I don't think people actually understand what position he does play. Now, if Frank Lampard decides to play him behind the striker, behind Werner, which is what they do for Germany, by the way, when Havertz plays for Germany, they're going to tear teams apart. And I'd be saying, because even though Werner hasn't played particularly well, he's still got a good points return. You know, I'm pretty impressed with what he has done. I think he's scored about 5 or 6 goals. So considering he's been playing out of position, he's done quite well. But yeah, for me, look, if you're looking at that, who am I going to bring in? I would be just looking at Reece James, or I'd be saying Chilwell.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. For the last point on Kai Havertz, I think the worst thing to happen to Kai Havertz this year is that Jadon Sancho didn't move to Manchester United, because that probably takes all the pressure off his transfer fee. Because look, that was the biggest, I believe, in the transfer window, and with that does come that expectation from your own fans. Look, I think if Chelsea fans were honest with themselves, they would say that it hasn't been to the standard they thought it would be. Like, Chelsea fans were all convinced that it would be Havertz and then Mason Mount would be backing up him, but Mason Mount was better than Havertz to start the season. So yeah, it's been a crazy one. And like I said, this Christmas period might be what they need, because they might need that rotation. They might need to be changing it up a bit, and them not to pick the same team and have the same formation. And that might unlock something. Sometimes things like that happen, and it actually is for the better when there's actually a lot of games and managers are forced to rotate, because you'll see it with a lot of the big teams. So with that, I guess we'll preview this upcoming week. And there's a couple of interesting games. We'll start early on. So we've the Palace and Liverpool game. I think everybody's expecting Liverpool to do a job there. They've been back to kind of their best. You saw them against Spurs. And well, Spurs, I think, edged it in terms of how they were playing. Liverpool were still very, very dominant when going forward. And look, I've been impressed with Guaita in goal for Palace. I think he's had multiple very, very, very good games. But when you have Salah, Mane, even Firmino now scoring, it's going to be tricky for Palace to keep a clean sheet. And it depends how good can Zaha be. Because if Zaha can be on form, he can trouble any team in the Premier League. But when Zaha's not on form, and look, like you said earlier, they don't have Benteke either. It's going to be a really tough game for Crystal Palace, in my opinion.
Yeah, look, I think Liverpool have really impressed me, frighteningly so. And it's really difficult to say, but they're very similar to what you're seeing under Sir Alex Ferguson with Man United, where you just take key players out, but they're just still playing at a similar level. The drop-off hasn't been that dramatic. Defensively, look, they can be got at. And Spurs didn't go for it. And that was the problem. That if a side goes for Liverpool, we've seen that. I mean, they're playing... you have no senior defenders. Not one. I don't think Matip will be ready. So you're playing Fabinho, who's a fantastic footballer, mate. He's such a versatile footballer. He can play right back, play defensive midfielder. He can probably play further forward as well. He's that good. And then they're obviously playing a youngster next to him. So they can be got at. The question is, our team's going to do that? So I think, look, on this one, I think I can't see past Liverpool win. Robertson's a great shout to have as well. He's taking corners. He's created 22 chances. That's just more than any other defender in FPL, which is unreal. I mean, I think he's probably playing better than he ever has done. He's not really getting as much praise, so I can't afford to have him in. But he got an assist. He got the assist for Firmino's goal. Mane's a player that I would be avoiding, but he will spark into life because he's world class. But you got to have Salah in. That's a must. I think if you're going to choose a big player to come in, I'd be bringing Salah in and I'd be captaining him. Yeah,
I do agree. I think, look, even when Salah's not scoring and not assisting, he's still the most dangerous player for Liverpool, and it's very obvious. You saw Tottenham really try and take him out of the game, and still he was dominating some of the Spurs defenders. And look, I think he's the one that you really have to kind of hone in on. It goes back to what I said earlier. You get that superstar in your team this week, even if it means you have to spend that little bit of extra points to get him in and not have to change it around during the Christmas period is really, really important. The next game is really interesting. It's one of those that you don't really know what way it's going to go. It's Southampton against Manchester City because both teams have been very, very good. I think Southampton were a little bit disappointing in their last game, but other than that, I think they've been. I know Glenn will be very happy to see all the great Southampton performances, but with Danny Ings back as well, they're one of those teams that you don't pay too much attention to. But then towards the end of the season, they're about 6th or 7th, and you're like, how are they still there? It's kind of like Sheffield United last year, where I think people forgot about them, or Wolves last year. People forgot that they were still getting a lot of points, and I can definitely see Southampton doing that this year. Against Man City, might be tricky because, look, they're under a little bit of pressure, not beating West Brom, the draw against Man United. At some point, those players are going to get pissed off and they're going to take it out on a team. This is typical Man City fashion. They get a load of draws and they demolish a team 5-0 or 6-1. I don't think it's against Southampton because they're very good defensively as well. But this is a real tricky game for me to call. Personally, I don't think there's going to be huge points in the game. I can see both teams trying to defend because, look, both attacks can be very dangerous. I could easily see kind of a 1-1, 2-1. I think players that you need to look out for, you look at James Ward-Prowse, I think, because he takes all their kind of set pieces, and City do give away a lot of free kicks. Look, we've mentioned all the tactical fouls they give. They give away some silly free kicks at the edge of the box as well. And then you probably look at Ings as well, has played quite well. But then who do you look at on the City side? Do you look at Kevin De Bruyne, or do you look at some of the flair players and the likes of Sterling and Mahrez?
It's a tough one. I never thought I'd be in a position. So I've got Kevin De Bruyne right now. He's going straight out for Mo Salah, 100%. But I've also got three Southampton players. And I've never had that many. So I've got McCarthy in goal, who he's not going to play. It'll be Pope, definitely. Then I've got Kyle Walker-Peters, who's been really good. And then I've got James Ward-Prowse. So, look, I mean, Glenn's going to be delighted. Glenn messaged me today actually saying, he said, do you think City are going to beat us? I said, I don't know. I think you've got a really good chance, better chance than you've had in years. But he said, problem is Southampton looking leggy. At the end of that Arsenal game, they were looking leggy. They work very hard. They haven't got a very deep squad. So I think while we've all been so impressed with Hasenhüttl, I don't see Southampton going in and changing and deviating from their philosophy. They're going to press. The problem is they're going to play a high line and City can pick you off. So I think it'll be a 2-1 to City. But again, who do you play in City's team? It's a real problem because they rotate, even their fullbacks, they rotate. Kyle Walker seems to be the constant. Kyle Walker and Ruben Diaz are the constant. Ruben Diaz is emerged as the number one. If you want a City defender, you're probably best going with Diaz because he's the one that seems to do pretty well. But for this game, I would be keeping Ward-Prowse and I would be keeping Kyle Walker-Peters just purely because I can't afford anyone else. Or Kyle Walker-Peters might go out actually for Lamptey.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think just on what you said there, with if Southampton do want to play with that high line, I think the one player you look at then is probably Raheem Sterling because he's the one to get in behind. Some of the other games that kind of follow that, you have Everton and Arsenal. It doesn't. I think if it was at the start of the season, it would entice me a little bit more. But with James not there, with Alan not there, Everton just don't look like the same team. And you're seeing it with the lack of chances being created. You could see them getting a little bit of a bounce back against Arsenal, who really have struggled. And it's hard to say for Arsenal fans, but it just doesn't look like there's a light at the end of the tunnel just yet. I think they really need this transfer window to come quick because they need to get some creative players in that team because they're creating a couple of chances a game, and really none of them are quality chances. So for me, I would stay away. I know there's some people that still have Calvert-Lewin. I got rid of him about, I think it was a week ago because
last week.
Yeah.
Everton have won their last two. They beat Leicester and they beat Chelsea, I believe. So they're doing all right. You look at them at the table, they're looking pretty decent. I've still got Calvert-Lewin. He's only blanked 2 or 3 times in 12 games, which is pretty good. But yeah, I would be avoiding. But also remember, the reason why I'd be keeping Calvert-Lewin is because Gabriel is banned. he got a red card. So I'm looking at that defense and I'm thinking, a couple of tasty crosses going in. Richarlison's another good shout because he's going to run in behind, and he stretches the defense. But yeah, apart from that, mate, I'd be avoiding any other Everton players. I wouldn't be touching their defenders. I know Holgate obviously scored last week, but I wouldn't be touching any of them, and they need their creative players back. But no, look, 6 points from a possible 6 against Chelsea and Leicester is a great return.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those that I battle with because, like I said, I have those 2 transfers, and I think, do I bring Calvert-Lewin back in? But then this next game is what kind of catches my eye, and it's Newcastle against Fulham. And currently, I have Callum Wilson in, who again hasn't been. I think he got an assist in the last game, but again, he hasn't got back to that goal scoring form yet. But against Fulham, who've actually been improved over the last few weeks, you look at them playing, they've looked definitely more stable, and they do look a lot better going forward. You see Lookman, who's played really well every time I watch him. He just looks so skillful, and he looks like it's so easy. But I guess it's because teams are feeling they can dominate Fulham, and there's so much space for the likes of Lookman to run in behind that he's getting a lot of chances. I'd still expect Callum Wilson to get a good amount of opportunities against Fulham, so that's always a good shout. The other game that's kind of a drab one there is Brighton and Sheffield United. Don't see much in those ones. So in those 2 games, is there any other names that you could pick out or that you're kind of honing in on for this week?
I think you're pretty spot on when it comes to Fulham. I think he's been brilliant, Lookman. He's a player that I'm considering because you think about James Ward-Prowse against City. Is he going to get that many opportunities? Maybe not. But Lookman against Newcastle, you can very much see it. You can see them. You can see he's the only creative outlet, put it that way. And his form's pretty good. It's about 4.5. So for me, though, I would be probably avoiding. I'm not going to bring Callum Wilson out. He's not scoring enough for me. I think I've got Kane and Calvert-Lewin, and I'm going with 2 up top and then packing that midfield with quality because there's some really good options. Looking at the Brighton game, Lamptey's a possible one for me. Although he is possibly doubtful, but he's likely to play. He's the player I'd be looking because Sheffield United don't score goals unless they play Man United, and then they score a third of their goals, which we talked about off air, didn't we?
Yeah. We move on. That's what we do here. But I think the 2 big games that we have to talk about, and they're interesting, the Spurs and Leicester game, and then also United and Leeds. Both you could see, depending on how those first halves go, could depend on if it's going to be a really high scoring game or pretty low scoring. You've seen in previous weeks when Spurs have got out and scored, after they've scored, it's been pretty dull where they haven't created much. Really, in a Spurs game, you're hoping the other team scores first because then at least there's more chances, because it just seems like, and it's typical Jose Mourinho, you score that early goal and then you kind of sit back and relax. You hope that then you catch a team on the counter-attack, which with players like Son and Kane is very good. But if a team is fairly stable at the back as well, you're not going to see that many chances being created afterwards. And that's kind of what you saw. When they play against the better teams, though, there seems to be more chances to be created. Like against Liverpool, I don't know how Bergwijn didn't score about 2 or 3 goals in that game. There was so much chances there. If Son or Kane had those opportunities, you probably see a goal or 2. Leicester, on the other hand, if Spurs push up too much, then you might see Vardy come in. But again, he's been a real tricky one. Like, you expect them to get to those goal tallies towards the end of the season, but you watch them and they don't impress me this year. And it's really weird because normally Leicester are one of those teams that you're like, they're a good team to watch. They'll be tough to beat. This year it hasn't been like that. They had a really good start when they had the likes of Castagna come through. But I think losing Castagna, still not getting Ricardo Pereira back, it's affected them more than I thought it would. And also, look, we can't forget Ndidi not being able to play for pretty much the whole season. It has affected them, and they are kind of going to those second options a bit earlier than they probably would have wanted.
I said this when Brendan Rodgers joined. You just have to look everywhere he's managed. You look at Liverpool, you look at Celtic. His teams get worse as they go along. They really do. I think he's a good manager, but I don't see the hype as much around him. I think his team plays lovely football. I think he's a good manager, but I don't see how he's an elite level manager. For me, they haven't really impressed me. But I looked just now. Vardy's had 10 goals and 5 assists. Where's that come from?
Penalties, maybe.
5 penalties. I know that at least. But Vardy's a player that I've thought. I know James Jackson's had him in, and he's been giving him returns. But he's a player I've thought. I mean, he's second in the standings behind Kane, quite far behind, about 20 points. Yeah. He's level, just 1 point ahead of Calvert-Lewin. So, but then you look at the price as well. He's about 10.5, isn't he? So, for me, it's always like, right, if you're going to have Vardy, then you can't have Kane, and that means you can't have one of Salah, or you can't have a Bruno. So, looking at that game, yeah, you're right with Spurs. Jose Mourinho's been quite lucky recently in terms of he's gone and scored the first goal and then held on, and that's actually going to backfire for me, I think, over the next few weeks, which is why I wouldn't be touching a Spurs defender, because we saw that against Palace, where this negative tactic, and see, Jose does this usually after Christmas, but he's doing it now. So I think what you're going to see is, I think you'll see Spurs, possibly the numbers drying up a little bit, and the ones to have really are Son and Kane. So looking at that game, I think Spurs are going to win it. I think you're right with Pereira, and Castagna was absolutely on fire. He was looking like the signing of the season in his first 5 or 6 games. Yeah, he's been out for a while, and they've lost a bit of threat from their fullbacks. I don't expect that to be a high-scoring game, but we will, though, is that you've seen Leicester go into big games, and they've been much more pragmatic in actually with the low block. But I do expect that they'll have most of the possession at Spurs. If you're going to bring a Leicester player in, I'd be looking at Maddison, actually. He scored a couple last week. A couple of weeks ago, sorry. And he's looking like he's hitting some good form, so he's a bit cheaper as well. In terms of, did you mention United and Leeds?
Yeah, so that's the other big game, so the United and Leeds game. So, look, we mentioned some of the United players. Is there any, like with Bruno and Rashford, is there anybody that you'd be looking at this game? I know we've mentioned before in previous weeks that Patrick Bamford seems to score pretty much every week now.
Harrison is a player I think you could look at. He had a good week last week. I mean, Leeds scored 5. Unbelievable. Yeah. Against a Newcastle side as well, who play very, very deep. They play a very low block. So to score 5
we had a show when I think it was Red Devils Talk when the game was on. And I remember looking at it at the start of the show, and it was 1-1, and I think it was nearly half time. I look at it towards the end of the show, and I'm like, 5-2, what happened? But and look, it's against the United defense as well. That's been pretty poor over the past few weeks. So I think having a Leeds player in, especially if it's one of the differential picks, so whether you want to go for Rafinha, if you want to go for Harrison, even look, you can pick 1 or 2 of the defenders as well, because look, from corners, United are a shambles. So anyone that on the Leeds team that are pretty good from corners, that's why now I've kept Bamford in the whole season, but I think
I'd come out.
I think this could be a very good game to have him in, because look, he's the type of goal scorer that the United defenders don't like. He makes those runs that he can really be a big threat against United. I could see this game being really open, because I can see Leeds scoring early and United having to go for it.
Yeah, I'm really struggling to predict this game. I hate that, because you want to see United are going to win. In terms of, will I bring any Leeds players in? Probably not. I'm happy with what I've got. I like to play 5 in midfield, because I think there's a lot of quality in the midfield. And with the strikers, but if I was going to take Calvert-Lewin out, the first person I'd be bringing in is Bamford, and then I would be putting some more money in my defense. But on that game, yeah, I wouldn't be looking past Bruno, to be honest with you. Maybe Rashford. I wouldn't be touching any of United's defenders with my money. And you'll see David Gea come back in goals. So that's a change that you will see.
Yeah, absolutely. And just a kind of quick run through of the last 3 games. There's not much really in it. You have West Brom against Villa. I think the only real option there is probably Jack Grealish, who's kind of dried up a little bit over the last few weeks. Now, you look at the games and he's still performing well, but he's just not actually getting the goals or the assists for fantasy purposes. You look at Burnley and Wolves. Wolves have been pretty good. They've been a little bit inconsistent. You looked at midweek and Podence and Neto were excellent, but then you looked at the weekend and they weren't that good. So That's an interesting one as well. I have Neto on my bench, which I wish I started him during the midweek.
Goals, 1 assist in the last 3 games. He's definitely one. And Podence has really impressed me this season. His center of gravity is fantastic. But I feel like since Jimenez got injured, and we really hope that he does come back, but they look much more fluid. Yeah. So I felt like Jimenez was not having a good season. He was not getting in the box enough. It wasn't right. I think his head was turned. He was linked to United and Juventus. But you're looking now, they look more fluid, and Neto and Podence are wants to get shots off. And that's what they weren't doing before. I feel like they were looking for the focal point. They were looking to put crosses in. It wasn't working. They looked one-dimensional. They look much more threatening now.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an interesting one because I think Wolves needed that middle ground between Jimenez and kind of the young kid that they have playing at the moment, because it's a lot on the shoulders of an 18-year-old to come in for 35 million. And look, he's not developed physically, so I feel bad for him because he's a good player. Like, you don't sign for 35 million from Porto if you're not any good. But I think he just needs to adjust to the Premier League, and I think he's been put in a little bit too early, forced because of his injury, and that's why you'll probably see Wolves bring somebody in the January window on a short-term deal. It makes sense in that case. Look, the last game was Chelsea and West Ham, which we've kind of spoken about already. A couple of guys out for West Ham. Again, one of them that you mentioned earlier that could be a good option is Souček. I think he caused Chelsea a lot of problems when they last played. He could have scored 2 or 3 goals in that game, and I could easily see him being a big problem for Chelsea this time around as well.
Yeah, he's a player. It was between him and Ward-Prowse for me, and I thought, he's not going to score against United, and he did score against United. Now he's a good threat. He's a player who, if I was going to bring a West Ham, it's a funny one, isn't it? Because with West Ham, or any time in fantasy football, you wouldn't be bringing in a Matic, would you? Unless he's taking penalties like Jorginho. But Souček is a massive threat, and they're strong on set pieces, as we've seen all season. So what I would say to that game is, we've said some of the players, but I would also possibly, if you want to bring in a striker, maybe Haller, because he's looking like he's in good form.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think the best way to end it this week is, again, the captain's picks is probably it's actually relatively straightforward this week. I think Salah is definitely one that you have to do. He's against Palace. It's one of those that I think it's very likely that they score. I think you can't go wrong with Son either. He's been that good. I think he's starting to catapult himself into kind of a superstar level, which is unfortunate for a lot of rival fans. But like, it would not surprise me to see Son playing for someone like Barcelona or Real Madrid in a couple of years' time, because he's getting to that level.
For me right now, he's the best winger in the league, I think.
Yeah.
Looking up there as well, obviously Salah's up there, but I've said it for a long time. I said it to you in the group chat the other day that Son doesn't get the same coverage or praise as, let's say, Rashford does. Rashford gets a lot of praise purely because, one, he doesn't play for Man United or a club that size. Tottenham's still a big club, but it's not a huge global club. And also because he's not Brazilian, or he's not Spanish, or he's not Argentinian. If it was Hongminho, mate, or Soninho, mate, he would be absolute, like, he'd be 100. He's a £100 million player for me. And he's so keen, and he's a dream. He works really hard. He's likable. I love him, man. I wish he was at United.
He is the perfect player for any club, because even though we say he's not Brazilian or he's not Argentinian, really what the clubs want now is they would have, United, Madrid, Barcelona would have killed for an Asian player to be a superstar, because that's where some of these huge markets are. It's the reason why every time United went to China, every single person wanted to see Jisung Park, because he basically represented a whole culture. And
just add, Ciaran knows that Jisung Park is Korean, but South Korean.
Yeah. No. He was South Korean, but anytime, usually United went to China on those preseason tours. But it was just one of those that it was kind of the first really big name that you saw at one of the big clubs. And now you're starting to see it again with Son. It's it's good to see, because you are starting to see more of the players. I know there's a kid that plays for Barcelona as well that's kind of coming through there that's supposed to be pretty good. There's someone from Valencia, but look, to have someone at the level of Son, again, for a team that you have a hard-working superstar, that you have someone that is a team player.
Smiley, who's likable, who's marketable as well.
This it might be a bit of a stretch, but he's probably, in terms of play style, is the closest thing to Ronaldo at United that I've seen in the Premier League.
I was literally thinking that. He's very direct. The way that he's able to, he dribbles with speed, the way he shoots. I mean, that goal against Arsenal is not talked about enough. As soon as he hit that, that was he just won the Puskás Award for the goal against Burnley last season, where he pretty much ran through that whole team.
He's going to win it again.
He's going to win again. He's got everything in his locker, and that's why. Look, I love Son. Every time he plays, I'm wax lyrical. I absolutely love him. Even when he was at Bayer Leverkusen, I was like, right, this guy's a good player. This is a player that United were linked with. I know Bayern Munich said they were always going to go and buy Son. That's what they've always said, but now they've got other options. Franz Beckenbauer, I believe, was the one that always used to say that. But from a fantasy point of view, he's always going to give you a return. And if he doesn't one week, he's going to go and score a hat trick the next.
Yeah,
you have him in, and I think captain choice for me it's between. I'm going to go Salah because I think he's got a favourable fixture, but I think you can easily have Son or Kane. I wouldn't probably, or possibly Bruno, but otherwise I wouldn't be looking elsewhere. If you've got Grealish as well, possibly Grealish, but he's not really returning.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. If you're not looking at one of the superstar players and you're just looking purely on matchups, I guess in previous weeks you could probably go like I said before, I expect Bamford to score against United. It's just one of those. United have been defending badly. Bamford's been on pretty good form. So there's that one. If you don't have some of those superstars, you can maybe look at Callum Wilson against Fulham. But again, really with your captain pick, you want to be picking kind of the main guys that you know are going to produce for the most part. Especially, look, a lot of this has been kind of been like a Christmas, kind of the Christmas break or the Christmas period episode as well. You don't want to have to keep changing your captain week in because you're going to have so many games coming up. So you kind of want to be able to stick with that team because, look, it's only human nature. You're probably going to forget one of these fixtures to set your lineup in time. So having that captain set and looking forward to games is probably a good idea. And I don't think you can go wrong with Salah or Son because they seem to get the points regardless of what the fixture is, and it just happens that they actually both have pretty decent fixtures coming up, and I'd say those two are really good options to be your captain over kind of the next couple of game weeks. So I think that's pretty much everything that we can cover at the moment. The other thing is, I guess, just the small note is for people to remember is that in January there is a new wild card, so this is a good time to kind of be looking around about your team, players you want to bring in, and also probably not just jump at the fact to do a wild card straight away because you might need it later on in the season. Because remember, like, we've had a pretty short time to January, but there's going to be a lot of games coming between January and I think the season ends in May or June. So it might be a good idea to look at it, but also don't just use the wild card the first day that it comes out.
Yeah, that's the look, there's a lot of games coming up. Remember when the knockouts are for the Champions League and Europa League, when they get more obviously deeper, that's when a lot of the bigger sides, if they're still in, they're going to start rotating. City, for example. So I'd be looking at the wild card, and you've got free hit guys. So consider the free hit over the wild card. That's what I'd be saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, I just want to say thanks for everybody watching again. We probably won't be back for the Fantasy Football Show until the new year. So hence the reason why there was a lot of talk about kind of the Christmas period. So just make sure that you have those lineups set. Again, I think this is probably the most important week because while there will be deadlines over the Christmas period, in case you do forget, just make sure you have kind of your fantasy lineup set for this weekend. It's probably the most important one. And yeah, we'll see you guys next time. Make sure you like, subscribe, and look, you can listen to this on YouTube, Spotify, and all the great apps that you can see right in that bottom hand corner.
Absolutely, guys. Have a lovely Christmas as well. Good luck on fantasy football. Make sure you change your team, and we will see you in the new year.